Welcome, everybody, to the Better Learning Podcast. I'm Mark Barga, and I am here with Dr. Tim Matlack, Ken Bonkoski, and Phil Leinbach. And they're going to tell us a story of this incredible school district and everything that you guys have navigated for the last several years. But first, let's start with some quick background. Ken, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you to the table today.
So this is my 23rd year in school. Basically started out as a tech, and then I've been running my business consecutively for 30 years. And got to Antietam in 2018, and which I felt like was my calling because the school was struggling. There was not a lot of stuff done to it because of resources. It was nothing that was chosen to be that way. So started off in the beginning as, trying to get things up to par, better classroom situations, conditions was a big thing we were dealing with. Old age, just regular maintenance of the daily stuff like your floors and stuff like that. It was a challenge, and it's been a challenge ever since. It started out with those types of things as far as just getting because I feel this way, you give somebody a good environment, it only enhances their abilities. So my whole thing is to give what I can. And luckily, I'm very blessed with my skills and my knowledge. So I try to use those resources and like people like Phil, and I have a good network that we've established as, I've had ongoing, but coming here, I've been able to branch it out even more because I'm in a different region from Montgomery County to Berks County.
We're gonna pick your brain on some of those particular skills here in a moment. Tim, tell us a little bit about your background.
So I've been in education for 21 years, 17 of them with Antietam School District. So I spent 10 years as a classroom teacher, a high school English teacher, 5 years as an assistant principal, and then this is my second year as superintendent. So been part of the community for a while. It's important to me.
It's probably been 2 boring years for you.
Oh,
huh?
absolutely. It's been a snooze fest.
We'll hear more about that in a minute. Thanks, Tim. Phil, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I've been here with AEM Architects for 35 years. And when I started here, we had ongoing projects with the Antietam School District. We've worked, I think, on every building in the district at various times, and obviously different administrations. And when Ken came on board, we went through some projects together. And my background is similar to Ken's. I grew up in a construction family, so I bring a practical application of designing what you can build it efficiently, effectively, and I want it to be around in 25 years without headaches. And we lean heavily, obviously, on the educators to get spaces that they need to facilitate the educational process and curriculum that they have implemented. And then we lean heavily on people like Ken to make sure they can maintain and keep these spaces working the way that they're supposed to, so education doesn't notice that it's being impacted. So we've had a great relationship with Antietam over the years, and while this one kind of came together in a little bit of an unusual way, it's been a good one, and we look forward to keep this going and see the project come to full fruition.
Well, so yeah, it has been a little unusual, I think we can say. So, our audience is extremely familiar with school construction processes and conventional, unconventional places where those journeys begin. And this certainly is a little bit unconventional here. So can you tell us a little bit about how this journey began for you guys?
I'll start off. We had been contacted by the business manager for the district, and we had scheduled a meeting for, I think it was the week of August of 2023, to meet with the superintendent, the business manager, and Ken to talk about some work to repair some entrance systems. And lo and behold, just a week and a half prior to that, July 23rd hit, and Ken, you should probably take it from there because you were living it firsthand.
Yeah, so it was July 9th of 23. It was a Sunday. And actually, I had my own project going on in my own house. I was building an addition. So I had been looking at the weather that day, and I live 15 minutes from here. And we looked at it, we were digging footers and all, and we saw that the weather was coming, and we were like, oh, by 11 o'clock, we got to wrap this up, get everything covered up. So we did. I buy lunch for my guys, we're sitting there, and all this rain started happening, like rain that I'd never seen before. And this was even at my own home. And I jumped on the cameras at the school because we had already had, so a little bit, I'll back up a little bit on that one. So we actually were in the process of restoring the creek walls from a 2020 storm, okay? When I say repairing, just putting back as in kind, nothing to remediate any flooding, stuff like that. It was just to put the walls back. They had been taken out in 2020. So that was a 2-year process to get all the permitting in place. So, and a lot of snags went along the way with getting the job started because of EPA and all that stuff that we had to go through. So they wound up not getting to the point of starting when we were supposed to that year. That would be 2022. Summer of 2022, we were supposed to start, and it got pushed, and we couldn't obtain materials because after COVID, we were having a huge problem with shortages with factories and stuff, and this happened to be a block we were using, a retaining wall block, and so they couldn't fulfill our order, so we had to pivot and redesign the wall to another block. So what the long and the short of that was, we didn't get as far as we wanted that year, and we had restrictions in the creek because it's a natural wild stream for trout. So we wound up having to, our window was January 2nd to October 29th, was the only time we're allowed to obstruct that stream, meaning you have to dam it up, bypass it. So they stopped that year, came back the year of 2023 late. They couldn't get it dammed up. We had already had a project on the corner of the intersection there that PennDOT was doing, who had taken the whole roadway out there. It was a culvert, and they were reconstructing that. So we already had creek fundamentals going on, and so my concern that day was we knew that the creek was bypassed up ahead and all that. So I got on the cameras. I saw all the two foot ADS pipes hanging out of the creek. So I jumped in my car, took my worker, my brother, and then I called everybody, our crew in, and we got there. And by that time, it was roaring, but didn't break the bank. At this time, it just kept raining and raining and raining like no other. And then it just came up. What happened was a building had collapsed on the corner. And we were holding true I'd wedged the door shut. We had barricaded the best we could with the time we had. And we wound up holding until the building let loose up the street. And then that debris came down and smashed through the glass. And then that's when it just totally ran through the entire building. And then that was when we lost it. And that went on we were there for 6 hours till it basically stopped raining because we couldn't get out because there was rapids all around us. And then at that point, after the rain had stopped and started to calm down a little bit, the roadway was gone. You know, all the 2 blocks up above the school were totally devastated. I mean, the road you couldn't even drive was unpassable. So we had to jump in the equipment, start pushing the debris away so we can get everybody out. And from there, basically started a recovery process that was just, until this day, I can't even tell you all the different things that we've dealt with. Like, for instance, now we're midsummer, right? So now we're thinking, okay, where are we going with these kids? So basically, with that being said, we started filling out our resources. We had a lot of pushback with the neighborhood, with community members and stuff like that. So we were fighting many different fronts with this to get the kids back in school. So we wound up coming up with putting some of the high school kids at, which is now our courtesy, it was an elementary at the time, but now is intermediate school. And we wound up putting some there, and then down the street to a block away was a church that had unused classroom space that they used to have for their own schooling at one time. And so we had to pivot, get in there while the electric was inadequate. It had no air conditioning. It had all these challenges ahead of us. So we had to pivot, go in there, rewire areas to be able to sustain some small air conditioning systems. We had to do internet. We had to put all the infrastructure in we needed. They didn't have it. So we had to quick throw that together. And then that took up some of the space. Well, now we have that. So basically we replaced the high school kids that year. Okay. Then after that, now we're going through the process of how are we moving forward? Where are we going? So our options were very limited. And that by this time, Phil had gotten involved with us at this point. And with everything going on. And then we started looking at all different avenues. We looked at an old school that was originally the school properly. It was just worse than any of our buildings was to begin with. So it was just a bad move. It would have, honestly, if we would have made that move, we wouldn't be sitting here today, because it would have just been horrendous. The amount of would have took the school to put that together. And so we wound up at that point saying, okay, we're going to build a K-3 back. We're going to take the high school kids and put the high school back to the high school. Because the high school used to be the high school. The last time it was a high school was in 1989. And then they shifted the kids down to the site that we're talking about that flooded. And then they didn't use that building. And then Phil came back into play for that particular building because the district needed to expand again. They got rid of the building, let it sit for so many years uninhabited. The township changed zoning at the time, so now we buy the building back. They go through this whole struggle in 2004 to try to put the school back so that, to be able to use the school again as a school. So there was a lot of fundamentals, and Phil's more familiar with all that than I am because that was in 2004. But what it wound up doing was handcuffing the school for a lot of years down the road. All of our struggles have been parking, this and that. It's an inner city school. And the way of the world that we're in today, nobody wants to be inconvenienced. Nobody wants to say, hey, there's a school there. You know, you got to live near a school. I mean, that's how it happens. Growing up in the inner city, that's how it was for me. You know, we live close to a school. You had to deal with the environment. That's just, the schools are important. Schools are number one. You know what I mean? Not your, inconvenience of your parking spot being missing and stuff like that. So that kind of morphed into, when we got back to try to change this back to a high school, we had the same battles again with the same people. And we, Phil, it was just so much work that they had to do to prove that we can exist here. And we're still dealing with it today. We don't even have proper parking around the school because they put permit parking in. And that doesn't allow us for our staff and any visitors to park on the street. So that's a huge burden that we're still dealing with today. But getting back to the story of how we got to that, so now we need to put that back as a high school, okay? This is where Phil came in and their team, and I mean, they scrambled. I mean, everybody did. I mean, because the amount of time that we had to do the design, build, implement was unprecedented. Like, what they had to do to get us on print, to get us to this, and to try to figure out was monumental in itself. Now you talk about getting in there to put science rooms back, all the fundamentals. We had a gym there. It's not as big as the gym we just lost, so that's a big deficit for the high school kids, but we're making it work, and we got the building back. So now Phil comes in and he takes and does his design, and him and I work through all of this together. So now we're back to like an $8 million reno to get that back to where we need to function again. So that started to take place a year and a half ago, and then started in May. We started beforehand. We started to try to move things along while school was in session. At that time, we had the younger kids there. We had the kids that were originally back in there since 2004 was the K-2.
Yeah, if you remember, we started out designing to expand the primary, I think the fourth grade at that point in time.
Yes.
So that was almost instantly after the flood. And then by the time we had it bid, which I think was, we pretty much went from, we need to figure something out, and within a few weeks made a decision. We're going to design to add classroom space to take that area that hadn't been renovated from the 2004 project and expand it for more student space, because we had that in hand. And by the time we bid it, then thoughts were starting to percolate to change that back to the high school use. But it was bid as elementary grades.
That's right.
And started construction, and that's, I guess, about the time you came on board, because the Dr. Rockland, who was superintendent and dealt with the initial issues out of the chute, I don't know how many, scenarios, probably 6 to 8 different scenarios just of how to get school started that fall. And then at the same time, what's our long-term plan? Multiple solutions that we looked at there. And then at that point in time, when you decided that was going to become the high school, that was kind of coinciding with what do we do with the present site of the old high school. We knew by really within weeks of the flood that we weren't going to recover the high school for use, because basically, while the whole building wasn't underwater, the critical infrastructure and the boiler room and the switchgear were under 6-7 feet of water, and Ken had alluded to the issues post-COVID, you weren't getting switchgear for that building for at least a year.
Yep.
So we could clean it up, do whatever we want, but we didn't have the power sources there to condition the building to keep it from growing mold and all the moisture issues that we would be dealing with till we had permanent power service. And the other thing we had hoped FEMA would step up and provide some financial assistance, and they gave us absolutely nothing. And so a little bit of trying to support that with the help of the county, throwing their weight behind us saying, hey, we need some help down here. FEMA kind of left us high and dry. I think we kind of knew that in September, and we kind of had an inkling that we had to keep moving without them. So we lost 110,000 square feet of education space for grades 7 to 12 and our district administration office. And to try to rebuild that, I think we were throwing numbers around in dollars at that day. We were probably looking at $60 million that the district didn't have. So now we're forced to do something with money we don't have and no resource financially to replace in kind the building that we lost. And so it was a real exercise in pivoting, but it wasn't just in construction, which we're mainly concerned with as architects, but educationally, how do you get these programs in here? What's the best resource and best location to educate our children with the limited funds that we have? And that's really what you jumped in the middle of, and Ken alluded, the dynamics of the community, while supportive, nobody likes uncertain. And so we were dealing with not so much of an animosity, but I just think human nature and reacting to, we want to know what's going on.
Frustration.
And sometimes you need to know what you need to know when you need to know it. And again, human nature, we're impatient. They want all the answers, and we didn't have them all at the time. So it was a design process. It was educational programming, and it was also community effort to keep them informed as best we could and assure them your best interests are at heart.
And with change comes friction. We know this, right? And in comes a new superintendent in the midst of this who's a community educator, a school leader devoted to this district. And so, Tim, you stepped into this situation, you know, in the midst of real chaos. Talk a little bit about that.
So just as part of the conversation, and so everybody listening understands, the Antietam School District, we're only about 4 square miles worth of space. So, and we sit right next to Reading School District, which again, while not large, population-wise is much larger. So we have about 1,100 students in the district, and we're a Title I school. So our budget of expenditures is like about $29 million total. So when you look at us and then you look around the county at districts that are about the same student population size, like our budget is significantly smaller than those other districts. And in addition, for our community, one of the things that they struggle with is the fact that the community itself is residential. We don't have a lot of businesses. So the tax base is, the residents bear the burden, essentially. So when there's any kind of tax impact on things that are happening, it's in property tax that it's being felt. So,
and many of these homeowners, we should say, were affected by the flood. And the flood really, yeah, I mean, this was for folks outside of this region. The National Guard came in to help. I mean, this was a significant event for this community.
Yeah. So in what Phil and Ken were alluding to, we've taken essentially the population of the entire school district of 1,100 pupils, and you've jammed them into a block and a half worth of space in a residential area, and all the staff that needs to be there. So it creates a lot of tension and friction, and we understand that. There was a lot to navigate there and a lot of unknown where, like Phil was saying, there were plans, and then, as Ken had mentioned, looking at one of the other facilities nearby, determining no, that's not going to work. Well, we had already communicated, we were looking at this, so then there's an expectation of oh, there's a direction. Oh, no, wait, that's not the direction. And so again, it just compounds the frustration of, it becomes the narrative of, are you lying? Are you covered? And that's what, and I understand why they're frustrated. It impacts the entire community. It was difficult for me coming in initially that a lot of that had taken place. Now, I benefited, I think, from the fact that I'd had 15 years with the district prior. So I was given a little bit of grace when I say something that people are going to like, okay, he's not lying, he's not covering something up. So I appreciated that. But when I came in, the plans were already pretty much in motion. Like I walked into something that was already moving. So I think in my estimation, because of Ken and Phil, I walked into a decent situation. Like things were already in motion. I just kind of came along and joined the fray at that point. If I had to deal with what Dr. Rockland was dealing with prior, like, that would have been just a lot worse. So I think from my perspective, when I came on, what I was trying to do is make sure we're communicating with the community that we're doing the best we can. We're going to keep you informed. And then as we went along, for example, when we reached the point where we had settled on what we felt like the design was going to be, Phil came to a board meeting, presented. We did have some community members there. They gave some feedback about, at that point, we were looking at space that would be like cafeteria and then a smaller gymnasium space. And there was a real frustration point for the community about, like, we lost the huge gymnasium in that old building. And now our intermediate building has a gym. However, like you can't have competition there. Like there's a set of bleachers like kind of inset in one wall on one end of the court that you could fit 20, 25 people. So we only had the high school gymnasium at that point. So there was a lot of feedback around, we need gym space. So that was another pivot moment of, okay, Hand and Phil, like, now we need a full-size gym, and they had to rethink again the entire building and come back to us. And that happened in a couple iterations as like questions came up. We'd say, well, can we do this? And then that piece about where we are financially on Phil's end, they're trying to scramble like, okay, if we did that, here's what the price impact is going to be. Well, can't do that. So it was a lot of cooperation there, and I appreciate AM and Phil and all the time that they took to work with us as we were trying to work through like what is possible and what can we actually afford to do.
So this was really a seismic change in the district on very short notice, right? And so it's an interruption that nobody wanted, nobody saw coming, a very unconventional start to school construction, but here you are, right? And so you have this challenge, and there's also an opportunity, right? There's also an opportunity, right, to strengthen the district, right? So tell me a little bit about your approach, Tim, in both helping frame that, process for folks, build consensus with all the stakeholders, community, faculty, families, board, as far as getting people to see, like, nobody asked for this, but we're going up from here.
Yeah. So in most of the communication that we try to do, we try to focus on the district's mission statement, which emphasizes togetherness and community involvement. And so we try to make sure that we're communicating consistently with the community, with the board, with staff, to make sure people are aware of what's going on. And in terms of the buy-in, I think one of the things that helped us was when we installed the modular units that the students in K-3 are working in now. For the people who were most directly affected, when 1,100 students were in a block and a half worth of residential space, once K-3 had moved out and moved back to the old site where the old middle senior high school had been, it was a little bit of like a deep breath, because that was the opportunity to say, like, okay, it's going to be okay. We don't have everybody smashed into all this little space right here, right now. So that helped us a little bit. And when we've communicated, we try to maintain that idea of this is an opportunity for us to improve. It's an opportunity for us to grow. We try not to perseverate on the challenge, like look to here's what we have ahead of us. And I do know, like, for our staff, especially in those modular units, as they're looking out windows, watching that building go up, like there is a sense of anticipation and excitement about like getting into it and seeing what it's going to be. We've had a couple of instances where we've had students give some ideas about what their new building is going to be or what it should be. one of them was a steel signing ceremony that we did as just a kickoff. And we had our first graders write about it, and they were saying that we needed a trampoline, that there should be a stained glass window. And I'm turning to Phil like, oh, was that in the plans? Did we have a stained glass window? And recently, the Secretary of Education came to us, and we visited a classroom, and she asked them the same question, and she got answered, trampoline again, a water park. So like, just letting you know now, Phil, we need to look at the water park.
Creek right there.
Yeah, the creek is right there. So the kids are also seeing this building come up out of the ground, and I think it's because of their age. It's probably a little different, that excitement that staff has. They don't quite, visualize what it's going to be yet, but I'm looking forward to the moment where we open those doors for the first time and we have those kids walk into the building and seeing their faces. And because ultimately those modular units, I know a lot of people in the community, myself included, when you first hear modular units, you're thinking like, oh boy, like, what is this going to look like? It is a decent space. It's not great. It's a little tight. It's crowded. It's not something that is meant to be a long-term solution, because for 5, 6, 7-year-olds, like, they take it out on on materials and things. So it's good to have the new building going in, but right now they're in a safe place where they are learning. So it's a good opportunity for everybody to see this is where you are now, and then when they walk into that new building and are in, for all of them, it will be the first time that they're in a school building, the ones who are going to be attending there, because of the grade span. So everybody who had been in what is now the old high school will have moved up into other buildings. So.
And sometimes when you see the way things had always been for a long time, and then you see like this temporary stopgap solution, it does also help you think about, well, what do we actually want the next chapter to look like?
When we work with schools at K-12, it's not just about furniture or design. It's about impact. Our radically student-centered approach puts students at the center of every decision. From that first conversation to the final walkthrough, we're focused on creating spaces that actually work for the kids, the teachers, and the community. So if you're looking to do more than just check a box on your next project, let's talk. Visit K12.com. That's KAY-TWELVE.com, and see how we're helping schools transform learning one student at a time. Because at K-12, it's not just about projects and furniture, it's about purpose.
So tell me a little bit about the design process as far as, yes, it was accelerated, but it was still an opportunity to think clearly and deeply about what these learning environments might be for these students going forward.
As we had alluded and Ken had stated, we initially started out with the solution to add the classroom spaces in what was the primary center, which is now the high school. And when we made that pivot, it's been such a blur. I want to say that was about a year ago, December, and steel is up in the air now. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure where the time went, but we had already started the process of putting K to something down at the high school site. And so that was probably closer to a year and a half, 2 years that we made that decision. But what was uncertain was what's the right alignment with the facilities that we have. Should it be K to 4? We talked about K to 6. We even talked about, I think, maybe making that like an intermediate school and putting the old elementary, the Carrie C. Hoffman building, back to a pre-K, early K, early learning to, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. So everything was in the mix. The only thing I think that was really solid at that point is that the old high school was going to be the high school once again. So we pretty much got to the point of recognizing we needed new construction there. We looked at a complete demolition of the entire building. Ultimately, we landed on keeping about 10,000 square feet, which was the administration and the old kitchen cafeteria at the high school. But that's kind of going to serve as central storage and flex space in the interim as the building comes online. And that's where we were just trying to figure out construction that, first and foremost, wasn't going to be subject to the same flooding issue if we had that same type of storm again. And that's kind of a separate discussion. So that was the orientation of the building and what the floor levels were going to be relative to the flooding that had happened. The second thing was putting a building on the site that would lend itself to, in the future, perhaps turning this back into a high school location if funds and conditions led to that. We're expanding it to a K-6 elementary and putting more structure on the site to expand that in the future. So it was a real exercise in trying to maximize the building footprint and preserve site for future expansion. Ultimately, we were packing everything up in that kind of northeast corner of the site toward the administration. And then when we were presented with, we really need some type of a gymnasium space, we've got the CAFA gymnasium in the new design that is large enough for competition volleyball. You can play basketball, but it's not really a regulation basketball court. And we really simplified the design where we were trying to wrap the building and turn the corner there. We built a rectangle. And so it was simple construction. We butted up on one side of the building. And then what we did to address the flooding within the township ordinances, and also just looking at what was going to be good design, the creek's there. And everybody wants to know, can you guarantee that it won't flood again? Well, that's a guarantee nobody can give. But what we could do was build flood-resistant construction. The term flood-proof was thrown around, and I don't think that's a fair term to apply to anything. But what we looked at, township ordinance said if you're built adjacent to a floodplain, and I don't remember the exact phrase, but you need to be at least 2 feet above the floodplain elevation. So we took the worst point on the site during the flooding, which was the administration office. That was the only one that didn't flood. There was a little bit of infiltration at the one door, and that was just simply because the water had piled up and seeped in around it. So the new main floor of the building is 2 feet higher than that. And the breach point that Ten talked about, where the doors eventually caved in from the debris and so forth, were 8 feet above that point. And so the entire educational program is 8 feet above the breach point where the flooding occurred that took the old building out, and then we have a story above that. The areas that are below that, it's a complete solid wall on the side of the creek, so that if that water comes down around there in the future again, it can't penetrate that side of the building. And if it gets above that 8-foot mark to our floor level, there's a whole lot worse issues for the community downstream of that building. That not a worldwide flood, but certainly more than the flood of the century. It would be just something unprecedented, and I hate to use that word, but we'd have far worse things to worry about than the state of that school. There'd be lives and structures at risk. So we think we have a sensible design solution that gives us confidence that if that same exact flood event occurred, I don't think we have to worry about water getting into that building. Of course, there was infrastructure added for stormwater that didn't exist before. We have sump pumps in the basement of the building to overcome those things. So we've done some sensible things that you would do in any building, maybe a little bit more belt and suspenders with this one because of the proximity and being in essentially the same location. But I think it's a good solution. It was a simple construction, really nothing outlandish as far as all kinds of different building sections and elevations. And functionally, with the input of the district, I think we have something that works educationally, gives them some flexibility in the future, and can absorb a bubble moving through the student population for the K-3 grade levels.
So I was working at an urban high school myself during the pandemic, and that was a difficult, challenging, and complicated experience. But there's a lot to learn from that, right? You learn a lot about learning and teaching and students and teachers. Tell me a little bit about your reflections, your takeaways, the things that you've acquired as far as knowledge about. We'll start with your teachers. Tell me about the faculty of this remarkable little district here.
So resilience, it doesn't quite cover it, as you just alluded to. Like, we had just come back from COVID, and so there was a ton of resilience built up over everything that happened with that disruption. And then a year and a half after coming back from COVID, here comes a flood. So our faculty, I've worked in several districts. So I would say that one of the things that consistently happens when we do interviews is that people ask, all right, well, why do you like it here, to us as the interview panel? And the consistent answer in every panel that I've been on in the time that I've been with the district is that not just the community, the faculty, they see each other as family. It is not something that I've experienced in other places that I've been. Yes, people have been cordial and they're, nice to each other, et cetera. But the group of people that we have working for us truly support one another at all times. And it's one of the reasons that I knew what I was walking into when I came back. I knew that they were recovering from the flood because I still had relationships with people that worked here and were talking to me over the year between when the flood happened and when I came back about what's going on and the struggles that they faced. I came back because I cared about the people that I worked with here and because I wanted to be able to help and because I had the confidence coming into it, knowing that this is a resilient group of people who are going to rely on each other through everything that they've been through. And so as much time and effort and energy as Ken and his team had to put into moving resources around, then on the back end, you have our staff who are doing everything they can do to make sure that kids have a welcome space when they walk into that classroom or walk into that building. And during the shuffle there, like walking into a church that didn't have air conditioning and wasn't designed to be holding, intermediate and high school age students for these classes. So it really and truly has always been that team effort. And I can't give them enough credit for their resilience and the things that they did to try and minimize the impact on kids. Like, there's nothing we can do to totally spare them from, oh, you don't have a building anymore. Now you're going to be going to school here and here and here. But they did everything they could to minimize the impact that the kids felt.
That's tremendous. Tell me about the students. How were the students affected, and what have you learned about these young learners?
So not having been here in that year where they were shuffled through, it's not as easy for me to speak to that one. I will say that in last year, as we opened what is now, again, the high school, being able to see those students go from an environment where they were shuffling back and forth between the church facility and the intermediate school, and they were only in each of those buildings for part of the day, to like, now we have a building again. And it's not just a building, it's our building. There was always a sense, because I taught and then was the AP, that 7 to 12 building was always mishmash, that you had the 7th and 8th graders and then the high school students. And as an administrator and as a teacher, I can say it's a difference between middle school kids and high school kids. And you always felt it. There was always that little bit of friction there, that it's not that the kids treated each other poorly. It's just there's a stark difference between the development of a middle school student and the development of a high school student. So I think for the 9th to 12th graders walking into that building is like, this is our building, this is our high school. You could see the pride and the joy that they had in doing that. And I was walking through the building with one of our board members whose child is a high school student, and she was recounting to me like her daughter coming home and talking about, oh my gosh, like the cafeteria, it's amazing. Like the spaces, they're amazing. So getting to hear that and see that, it's awesome. I'd say that for our same idea for our K-3 students, looking forward to that day when they walk into that new building, same feeling. But again, right now, they're doing well. They're doing well. And a lot of them, they don't know any different. Like, this is, the modular units are just where I started. So they haven't seen what it could be and what it will be. But there, again, staff have made those spaces welcoming and they're working.
That's awesome. Speaking of learning things about people, I understand that a few days ago, our friend Ken here actually received a very well-deserved recognition. Tim, do you want to tell us a little bit about what that was about?
So last year, we nominated Ken for the RISE Award, and that award is a national one that is handled at the state level. Each state has nominees that they can put forward, and so that at state level, any nominees are considered and then chosen. So we nominated Ken for the work that he did between the flood and at that point, and we had support from our state senator, Judy Schwank, and Representative Rusnock's office in that application that we made. And lo and behold, Ken was the successful nominee for the state of Pennsylvania. And we had the Secretary of Education come out on Tuesday to spend a little time with Ken. She was able to walk through the building, and Ken was giving her the full history of the building. And I was learning things because there were things that he was saying. I was like, oh, I didn't know that as we were walking through the building. And then she was able to give him that award with our students watching in the audience there in the auditorium, and he just loved the attention. I mean, it's just soaking it up.
Ken, you don't get into this kind of work for recognition. We know that. What was it like for you to get recognized for your real dedication and leadership on this?
So, yeah, that's a big thing for me. I do it because I love to do it and because I want to do it. I don't do it because I have to do it. It's hard because I don't feel like I need to have that. You know what I mean? I couldn't do it without the support that I had. You know what I mean? And the resources that I brought to the table are kind of unique too. And my guys and my staff and all the staff for that matter too. I mean, when we're talking about what we went through, we had even teachers, we had, like you said, we had National Guard come and help us. We've had teachers from other districts come and help us, during the process to get us moved out, and stuff like that. It's hard for me because I don't look at life like that. I look at it like, God gave me a gift, I use it. That's what I do. I help people.
And to Ken's point, is something in all of this, there's also, it's not just the Antietam community, that's the broader community that Exeter School District, which neighbors us throughout the process of the recovery, have been right there alongside to be able to support. We still use their tennis courts because our modular units are now sitting on what our tennis courts were. So they've allowed us to use their facilities to help continue some of our athletic programs. And they've always been there as somebody, as a partner, to say, what do you need? How can we help? So that sense of wider community is also something that I think has helped support us. And to the point about staff and the resilience there, not connected to the flood, but this, at the beginning of this year, we had a situation where there was a mold issue in one of the modular units that we caught right before coming back into school. We had to delay the start of school a couple of days for the K-3 group in order to address that. And that was another moment where everybody swings into action. It's not just oh, Ken, you and your guys fix this out. We had teachers, we had the administrators working to replace ceiling tiles and try and clean up after the mold remediation crew had been through. And it's an all hands on deck approach at all times.
And Phil, you've been really a partner for the district for decades. And your office, for those who don't know, is 5 minutes from the site we're talking about here. So you're rooted in the community. What do you hope that this new school really represents for not just, the school district as an entity, but really the community here?
My feeling is, upon its completion, the community, I certainly hope and should be able to look at that as a monument to the community. It's going to represent something very different than any other school buildings that I've completed. Everyone has its own community persona, but I think it's kind of the phoenix in this case, because July 10th, you're just kind of standing there with your hands in your pockets and not knowing what to do. And if I can just kind of hark back a little bit to Ken and the award, we work with a lot of facilities people. Everybody's different, but I think one of Ken's key characteristics is proaction. And in construction, in design, in facilities, proaction is beyond necessary, but all too often we see reaction. And yet we had to react to the flood, but it wasn't just a reaction to the flood. Ken, because of his background, was proactive, and at times we go, whoa, Ken, let the contractors take care of this. And at other times, we're a resource. Ken said, Phil, what would you do? And just a lot of back and forth, but it was never sitting and waiting for something to come to him. It was making things happen, and 99% of the time, it was the right thing to do to keep things moving. So that was part of what plays into this. And so back to the community and what this building means, it's Ken, it's all those that coalesced around him with the staff in the building, the community. Volunteers came in from outside for flood cleanup and relief, not just at the building, but in the neighborhood. And so I think, while it's going to be Stony Creek Elementary School, it's going to be a reminder back to July of 2023 and say, what was here and how this all came about. All those little threads and stories might be forgotten, but for years to come, it's that's the school that replaced the flood. And we pulled this off and we got our footing back under us, and we can move forward as a district.
The three of you are an accidental design team, right? That came together here under duress, really, in very complicated circumstances. But here you are navigating all the things: funding, construction, flood concerns, architecture, regulations, everything that goes into it, faculty management, student management, program development, everything keeps going. So even though you didn't have the long runway that many districts have when they build new buildings or additions or do large renovations, you're still here. What wisdom or what guidance or what words of advice might you offer to folks out there anywhere in this process? What have you guys taken away that you think is worth sharing?
I think from my perspective, and this is a theme that I see throughout the work that I do, is the importance of trust. The point that was made earlier, Phil and AM have been working with the district for a long period of time. So you know each other, you know the needs. Like, I don't have to talk to Phil about our budget or anything. Like, he knows. He already knows who we are, what we represent, and that makes the working together mesh. And I've seen, again, having been in a couple other districts, I've seen construction project where there is not that level of trust and there is not that level of understanding, and the tension that is created, and it is not a pleasant thing to witness. So, like, from my perspective, I think that's what I would say is the number one thing that is most important, is that you have a trust where you have shared understanding, shared values, those core beliefs about what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and you're seeing the problem from the same perspectives. That is what allows you to work together to get through the hurdles, to get past those obstacles.
Similar to what Tim's saying, it's a matter of being able to, instead of being overwhelmed when you have such monumental things in front of you, it's how to navigate what goes first logistically and all that stuff, and not overwhelm yourself, and just being calm as much as you can. You know what I mean? It's funny because they depict me in that as being calm, and my guys all laughed at that. And they were telling my parents and my wife, that's not Ken. You know what I mean? Because they see a different side of me sometimes. You know what I mean? Which these guys don't always see. Sometimes I could be over aggressive, sometimes, but I'll always reflect on that. And I'll tell you if I was out of line. It's just knowing, how to keep things going in the matter, and owning that you're wrong too. And being able to work past things as they come up, even if you don't agree on things.
And to that point, though, from my perspective, what allows you to do that and what allows Phil to do that, like, if there is frustration, it's that we do have the shared value and the shared vision of, like, we're doing this for a purpose for the kids and we're trying to get to the same point. So if we get frustrated, or you get frustrated with somebody and you snap, then it's easy to come back to what is it that brings us together, and, we move.
That's the common thread through this whole thing, is your guys' orientation towards the students of this district, right? And the family-like faculty culture of this district, right? That is why you're moving mountains to do the things that you're doing. Phil, you've seen every manner of school construction in your seat, right? So here you are in a very, abrupt and unusual and complex but accelerated process here. What would you share with folks?
Two things that I talk with our clients about, especially when we're pursuing projects, and I think they both apply here, is one, we've all heard the greatest ability is dependability. I think in design, it's flexibility. You just don't know what's coming around the corner sometimes, and you've got to be ready to pivot. And for those of you that remember Gumby, that's what you got to feel like some days. You got to bend, but not break. The second thing, and Tim alluded to it, is that idea of trust. And I'd encourage any administrator or school board member that listens to the podcast, don't be so quick to throw your architect out the door or the baby out with the bathwater. Consider the relationship. Yes, there are some bad ones out there, and you might need to change. The grass always looks greener on the other side of the fence, but the analogy that I've often used is your architect should kind of be like your family doctor for your buildings. There's an inherent history and knowledge of what has happened there, of budgets, of previous boards, previous administrators, and so forth. And so don't throw that body of knowledge out because you had one bad day. We're human. We make mistakes. And to Ken's point, you got to be able to fess up, own your mistakes, find a way to correct them, and you move forward. So I think it's having that trust. It gets strained in situations like this, but let it bend. Don't let it break you. And be careful. Your architect has a lot of resources, and it's a big decision to switch. And we have gone through it. We've been the one that the grass was greener on the other side of the fence. And I had a call from a superintendent a couple years ago. It's like, Phil, we're begging you to take us back as your client. And they're tough phone calls. It's gratifying, but you feel bad for the time that you were away from serving them the way that they had gotten used to you, because you know the experience wasn't what they'd come to expect from you. And so that trust is important that you build over time and try to find a way to maintain it. And this is about the biggest test that you're going to get, and we've carried through, I think, quite well.
That institutional knowledge is invaluable on our end. So I've been with the district since 2007, but Phil's been working with the district prior. So when we walk through what is now the high school, Phil's able to say, oh, 2002, 2004, like this happened. And that's before Ken or I were with the district. So having that institutional understanding, it helps what we're trying to do.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for sharing this incredible story of Antietam School District and this remarkable tale of overcoming an opportunity. And I want to thank all of our listeners, and stay tuned for more on this school district's journey.
The Better Learning Podcast is produced by Matt Rogers and edited by Kelly Jones. The views and opinions shared on this podcast are those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily represent the perspectives of their affiliated companies, organizations, or associations.